Good morning, everyone. Lovely to see you. I know a lot of people here already, and there's a lot of people I don't know, so it's nice to see you all here this morning. My name is Ben Folser. I'm an Associate Director at KPMG, the professional services firm, and I head up our transport technology team. I also head up our global payments in mobility service line, so that takes me all around the world, which is quite interesting. Never have a dusty passport, but I also don't get much sleep either. So KPMG's been working in integrated payments and ticketing for many, many years, and I personally have 12 years experience working with Transport for London, the Rail Delivery Group, which was RSP previously. And I think for me, there's a lot of learnings that can be taken forward from integrated ticketing and payments and brought forward into mobility as a service world. So I don't think anyone here will fundamentally disagree with the objectives for mobility ecosystems. And these are pervasive regardless of whether you're in the private sector or the public sector. Everyone needs to pull in the same direction. And I'm going to leverage a bit off James's presentation, say mobility goals, all working towards the same thing is got to be the bedrock of delivering mobility. But the challenge is that there are differences in the weightings of these, both in locations, but of course in the ecosystem itself, and in whether you're a public sector regulatory body or authority, or whether you are a private sector provider. And so the value drivers of achieving mobility or delivering mobility very much will guide and focus how a mobility ecosystem emerges, and therefore what a MaaS scheme might look like within that. It's interesting, I think, when we look at things like economic growth and prosperity, and again, picking up on what James was saying with Uber and TfL, it's not a bad thing to have private sector delivering mobility services, and especially delivering things like demand responsive transport. There are 80,000 drivers employed working for Uber in the local area. So it's a positive thing for the economy to have innovation and private sector involvement in the mobility sector. And we need to think about that when we're thinking about regulatory approaches for the mobility world. So, as I was saying, value drivers of MaaS and mobility ecosystems vary quite significantly across the chain. For customers, it's all about seamless connectivity, best value transport. I need to get something that works for me. And as James was saying, we're quite savvy. People have worked out how to get the best value transport, because most people take the same journey every day. I think sort of in a recent study by the DFT, it might be actually the Traveller study, sort of 80 to 90% of journeys are the same every day. So people work out what works best for them. We want personalised mobility, and we want it when we need it. So we've all got into this wonderful on-demand sort of mentality. I want my Amazon package delivered today. I want my Uber in 2 minutes' time. And we should reflect that. It's an important part of society, and we need to deliver it. And we ideally like first to last mile mobility. I had a lovely experience on Monday morning when I actually live in Zone 6 in London, so not that far out. And there was a broken down train on my branch line. So I had a 1.5 mile walk to the nearest mainline station, which made me feel slightly better about myself from an active mobility perspective, but didn't help my client meetings for the day. If you're a private scheme provider in mobility as a service, you're very much focused. You have to be focused on profitability. At the end of the day, you need to be sustainable commercially. We can have great philanthropy in this world around, I want to help deliver better transport ecosystems and objectives, but at the end of the day, you've got to be commercially sustainable. So direct revenue from how you're selling your products and services, and ancillary revenue from how you're commercializing your customer base. If you're an actual operator of services, whether that be rail, bus, taxis, etc., you're looking at mobility as a service schemes and thinking, great, how do I get access to a wider market? How am I going to cooperate or co-opt with other parties to deliver, be more attractive to customers? How am I actually going to reduce my costs? Can this actually help me reduce my cost of fare collection and drive up profitability? And if you're an authority, you're sitting there thinking, oh, crumbs, I need to deliver sustainable transport. I need people to be active. I need people to be potentially using more shared mobility, getting cars off the road. I need to be thinking about safety as well. But I also want to think about how do I leverage these technologies and these new innovations in the market to potentially nudge people or influence customer choice. So you can see that these are all things that are important, but they're quite contradictory if you look across the value chain, and it's important to get that balance right. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, though. I think we're going to see various different architectures emerge as we look across different contexts, and those contexts will be geographical, they'll be political, they'll be technological. So it all depends on how many services have I got? What's my diversification in the transport market? What's my political environment? Am I in an environment where I must, as a regulatory authority, I must direct and control, or am I in a much more sort of commercially open market where my transport authority is saying, well, let innovation happen, let businesses drive the agenda. And also, geographically, have I got the density of people I need to successfully operate a mobility as a service scheme? Have I got the density of services? So we think there are going to be four, in effect, model architectures. One, the public sector authority takes all. And I don't think it's wrong. I said none of these are wrong, but they are very different architectures. So you might say a Transport for London. I don't know. I'm not going to second judge or prejudge any of the transport authorities here. But we are working as a company across the world with many of them. So there might be a public sector authority takes all approach where they provide the platform and they either franchise services or they allow people to participate from the private sector, but their role is saying, I will control the platform, I will own the customer, and I will influence transport behaviours because it's an important thing for me to optimise my transport ecosystem. We may well have a model where it's completely open market, very bilateral relationships, so mobility as a service providers have bilateral relationships with everyone. The customer makes the choice about how many they engage with, one or more. We may well have a model where there's some sort of platform or aggregator in the data side. So this model up here, Barcelona and Vienna, is another great example, the Wiener Lienen program, where there's a authority-provided platform for interoperability of data and services, but actually any mobility as a service scheme can join it and any operator can join it, so long as they apply the same data rules for joining that platform. Now, the interesting thing about the Wiener Lienen program in Austria is that the predominant condition there for joining is that you have to show all the other available transport options. So if you're Uber and you're booking a here-to-here journey, you have to show the public transport options, which I think is a particularly interesting way of doing it. You're not forcing people's choice, but you're just saying, here's the alternatives. Or indeed a last model, and Chris, you can dispute or otherwise how I've drawn this. But in effect, the aggregator is there a single aggregator, customer engaged with them, and they connect to potentially multiple mobility services providers and then multiple operators. So, and again, there's no one-size-fits-all or right answer. Now, the way that we tend to think about what drives which of those model architectures it will be is, as I said, it's around the regulatory environment, the political environment, also the availability of services and complexity of services. But fundamentally, it's going to be around the need to address these key transport challenges and deliver the transport objectives. So as you go up that sort of curve of saying we need to address adverse public health issues, air pollution, need to deliver concessionary mobility, we need to address crowding on public transport, we need to address road congestion. The more that you're going to get in that space, the more it's likely you're going to be into a heavily regulated market. And the more it's likely that in that heavily regulated market, you're going to either end up with a public authority takes all approach, or you're going to end up with that regulated data layer, because the need to influence mobility choices to optimize the transport ecosystem. And of course, the more you get up there, the more that you need to have capabilities within the authority to actually deliver that. So both the technological capabilities to run the platforms, but also the the regulatory capabilities as well. So understanding how do you pull those policy levers and how effective they are as well. So being able to assess the impact of when you're pulling those levers on the ecosystem and what customer demand is doing. I'm not going to take credit for this. This is actually something in Cubic's recent MaaS paper, which again, I'm not. This is like a BBC thing. There are other providers out there, but it's a good paper to read, which is how you might actually measure the maturity of a MaaS model, starting from sort of no integration, which is not a MaaS model at all the way through to actually integration of societal goals, which very much aligns to what we've been saying, which is how do you make sure that there's the right fit for the environment, and it's got to reflect those objectives to the mobility ecosystems which we talked about up front. As I said, there are a lot of learnings we can bring forward from integrated ticketing and payments. We've been doing this for many, many years. Mobility as a service, actually as a concept, isn't new. It's the services layer on top of it that's new. It's the piece around subscriptions or we'll get you there guarantees or other things. But we've been striving for integrated payments and integrated journey planning for a very, very long time. You can use your Leap card in Ireland to unlock a bike. Okay, you might not be able to pay for it. In Chicago, you can unlock your Divvy bike with a payment card. And LA is just launching TapForce, which is, again, integrated payments, but with journey planning integrated. They don't call it mobility as a service, though. And so, as I was saying, it isn't a new concept. So, key operating model design challenges which need to be addressed, and this is where local authorities can absolutely get involved. But who controls the levers to achieve policy objectives? If you don't have the regulatory stance or you don't have the control within the local authority, is that in the private sector, do the commercial sectors, commercial providers have control? If so, how do you balance that across the various value chains? Customer ownership. Who actually owns the customer? This is one of the big key challenges because it's not just about whether I'm making direct revenue from my customer. It's about whether I can also commercialize the relationship I have with my customer and use that relationship to influence their choices. It's no surprise, and it's probably more in America than it is here, but in New York where we're working at the moment, a big thing for them, they just let a multi-billion-dollar advertising concession. The advertising concessionaire is very interested in how they engage with the customers. The transport authority is saying, well, actually, if they're using our app and we're the ones who are owning that customer and engaging with them, we can deliver more through the ancillary revenue streams, which, of course, from a transport authority's perspective is great because we're all cash poor. Inertia of sunk costs and effort. Don't forget that we've actually spent a lot of money putting in fare boxes on buses and ticket vending machines and other back office systems that have cost millions and millions of pounds. So don't forget that there's that inertia as well, and the need to actually get value out of what you've already got. Investments required to participate. We all assume that the answer is this, and therefore there's no investment because the customer holds the media in their hand. It's not actually necessarily true. Okay, in the UK we're fortunate. I think sort of 78–80% of people have a smartphone, but actually it doesn't necessarily apply everywhere. And if we think about concessionary travel, people who are using sort of reduced fare travel, a lot of people won't necessarily have access to a smartphone. They'll still want a card in their pocket, some media. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to probably put some readers out or allow people to use taxis and tap in a taxi or whatever it is. Well, that's an investment required to participate because those front office devices don't come cheap. Revenue allocation, no secret, it's always been a challenge. But actually, how do you get fairness and equity in that revenue allocation? Dealing with dynamic fares, a big issue. Taxis and intercity rail in this country is one of the big challenges why we haven't actually seen full integration of payments yet. Because, yes, okay, I know what my single fare is if I go across London, or I know what my boat fare is, but I don't know what my intercity fare is. Equity and fairness for both customers and operators. If I'm in a MaaS scheme and I'm a minority operator, how do I make sure that if I'm the most relevant to that customer, I'm shown at the top. We don't actually know. It all depends on how that MaaS scheme operates. If you're in a public authority operated scheme, it may well be that they always favour the public transport options first. Even a private operated scheme, they may favour their preferential partners who they make the most profit from. So it's all about getting that equity and balance. Product development, it needs to be fast, it needs innovation to happen. In an authority-led scheme, goodness me, it can take 6 months to get a new product into the rail sector here. So you get the balance here. It needs to be right. Where do the risks and liabilities lie? Another big issue. If someone doesn't pay, then actually does that vest across all the providers in the MaaS scheme, or does that vest in the operator of that MaaS scheme, or does it vest in one? And also, if someone defaults on actually delivering a service, how does that impact the rest of the operators? And finally, control of funds, which is actually, if you think about the balance on Oyster cards, is a massive liability for TfL, but they release some of that every couple of years. It's a good thing, actually. So whoever has that control of funds benefits. So all of these things are things that will impact MaaS schemes, but they're not things we've not seen before, and people do have solutions to them. So with that, I will conclude by just saying, think about the business model as well. A MaaS scheme is, in effect, a commercial business model. So all the key levers and what we call the 9 sort of components of the business model need to be thought about. And with that, I shall look forward to talking to you a bit later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And obviously, if you have any questions for Ben on that, then obviously we'll have our panel discussion later. But what I took out of that was that actually not one size fits all. And when we're talking about MaaS means something different to everybody, that is absolutely the case. There is not a one size fits all out there. And actually, I like the vision of the 4 potential architectures out there. There may be some others out there as well, but it certainly gives a good starting point on solutions and services out there. And as he says, they have to be commercial. They've got to be sustainable for businesses to buy into these and to run these services. So thank you very much indeed, Ben.